With the recent release of the Borderlands movie, reveal of Borderlands 4, and a 5-year gap since the last true Borderlands game, it seems there's a bit of skepticism around the cel-shaded franchise. But let's rewind the clock 15 years to the original Borderlands. Without it, there would be no long-spanning series and no universe. And without it, it wouldn't have a terrible movie recreation. But enough of the intro. It's time to receive a second wind and grab some popcorn as I give my opinion on the original Borderlands. The first thing that grabs your attention, no matter if you play the 2019 remaster or the original game that came out in 2009, is the art style. Borderlands is easily one of the most recognisable games, with its one-of-a-kind cel-shaded graphics that give it that comic book aesthetic. But most importantly mean that its graphics have not become outdated in a decade and a half after release. But what about the gameplay? Is that outdated? Well, mostly not. The simple but addicting gameplay loop of Borderlands started here, and it's just as satisfying. The real fun of Borderlands is grouping up with a couple of buddies, running around completing quests, shooting the countless enemies that get in your way, and slowly but surely levelling up, getting better weapons and doing it all over again. You may think I'm dumbing it down a little bit here, but at the core, that's what Borderlands is, and it's what makes it so easily accessible. The sheer amount of weapons in this game is mind-boggling, and it totals to an estimated 17 million. These weapons come in different classes like shotguns, assault rifles, etc. But what makes them all unique is the rarity and the brand. Rarity is a simple concept to understand, as it goes from white, which is common, green uncommon, blue rare, purple epic, and gold is legendary. The better the rarity, the better the perks on the weapon, and generally the better the rarity, the better the weapon is. Legendary weapons, especially in the beginning of the game, have a certain prestige about them, and every time I play Borderlands, I wait in excitement to see what my first legendary drop is. The branding of the weapons and the differences between them is a little bit harder to notice initially, but once you understand the system, it brings more charm to the game. The differences aren't as distinct as the games that followed on from it, but are still noticeable. For example, you'll soon pick up on the fact that Maliwan weapons always come with an elemental effect, or Jacob's weapons always feel very powerful but also very slow. The combinations of the rarity, the level, the manufacturer, and the class make the Borderlands weaponry different every time you play it, and for me, it's the thing that gives the game the most replay value. But that's not everything with the weapons, as particularly in the late game, the weapons can be used for specific builds, and for that, you'll need to choose from one of Borderlands' 4 characters. For example, Mordecai, who is the character I chose for my most recent playthrough. Mordecai comes with a special ability, which is his bird named Bloodwing, who can be used to damage enemies. In fact, every character comes with a pretty basic ability, but it's in Borderlands' skill trees where the true strength of each comes out. Take Mordecai again for example, and you have 3 options. Either focusing on the special ability and make Bloodwing even more powerful, with extra utility like giving extra drops. Or do what I did and focus on his other 2 skill trees, which allow snipers and pistols to be more powerful in his possession. This is another example of good replay value, as choosing a character and their build can always provide you with a different gameplay experience, and allows you as the player to experience Borderlands' wide range of weaponry at their full power. It's kind of ridiculous how good you can make these weapons with class mods and the skill tree upgrades. And whilst that could be a downside for some, for me it gives that rewarding feeling of power that skill trees should provide if used correctly. A word I mentioned previously in the video was charm, and that perfectly describes Borderlands. The game doesn't take itself too seriously, with all the characters having humorous lines, and there's plenty of hidden jokes throughout the game that always bring a chuckle. That charm also shines through how alive the game world felt in 2009. Now by today's standards, it might be pretty shallow, but for me, the shops where you can buy ammo and weapons found around the world that always rotate their stock was a nice touch, and it made the world feel a bit dynamic. The light tone for Borderlands is everywhere, and is even found in its story right up until the end where it takes a more serious turn. The story for Borderlands is pretty basic, but it works for the kind of game it is and what the game is going for. It follows the 4 aforementioned Vault Hunters as they look to track down a mysterious place of unknown treasure named the Vault on the planet of Pandora. This can only be accessed once every 200 years, and well now it's that occasion. With the help of Tannis, various other NPCs, and many different claptraps, we're able to track down the Vault key pieces across the planet and reach the Vault. Here we fight a new alien species who guard the Vault, and it only has that fascination behind this place. As I said, it's a story that works for this game in particular, as it gives a base idea for what a Vault Hunter is, whilst also giving a platform for this looter shooter game to work, as without a story, it would feel loose and all without purpose. I can't really say much more about it, to be honest. It does slightly hint at a sequel and does an okay job on its own. What I can speak about, however, and speak about with a lot more criticism, is the unvaried, uninspired, and tiresome mission and world design of Borderlands 1. The mission design is fine if you completely laser focus on the main story, as there is enough variety to keep you going there, but if you do that, you won't experience anything this game has to offer really. The game wants you to do side missions, which isn't a bad thing, but it could have at least mixed up a little bit. The NPCs and bounty boards in Borderlands turn out the same missions over and over again. So here are a few of my favourites. Go around the map and collect audio logs. This is repeated about 5 times. Or how about go to this area, kill enemies and pick up their drops. This is repeated more times than I care to count. Or finally, how about crafting a weapon type by finding all the different parts of an area. This is repeated for every single weapon type in the game, and none of the weapons you craft are even worth your while. In fact, about 90% of these side missions aren't worth your while, other than for the money and the XP they provide. Some do have funny interactions, but the bland and uninteresting design of the missions, coupled with the fact that most of the time you're running or driving around to get there, and then go all the way back to where you came from to hand them in. It means that by the mid-game, you're trying to complete the side content, but you're also trying to not fall asleep in your chair. This is all compounded by a part of the game that has aged the worst: the world design. Literally all of them, including a significant amount of the DLC areas, are based in a desert. Other than maybe 5 notable locations in the game, that being Firestone, New Haven, Old Haven, Treacherous Landing and the Vault, I really cannot tell the difference between these areas. You can show me a bit of gameplay from the start, the middle, or the end of the game, and unless they take place in the 5 areas I mentioned before, there is no way I'd be able to tell the difference. It makes everything about the game more dull. The already boring side missions suffer more because of it. Areas like the Mad Max area in the mid-game suffer because everything else looks similar, making it feel less special, and the overall world design they built up suffers ultimately because it makes you wonder, is the whole planet of Pandora just an open, huge desert? But aside from them 2 major gripes, there aren't too many other things wrong with Borderlands. There are some smaller things like bugs and glitches that still exist even in the remaster, but they're just funny more than anything, and the really janky driving mechanics are still here from the original. But the mission and world design really hold Borderlands back, as they're 2 major features that are very important pillars for an open world looter shooter, and they stop it from reaching that upper echelon. To conclude then, I think we can still look back on Borderlands fondly despite its flaws. After all, the success the game had did lead to one of the more successful franchises in gaming over the last decade. But I do think a lot of us slightly look through rose-tinted glasses when looking at the first game. Before I replayed it, I thought I liked it more than I did. But as I played through it, I found myself forgetting most of the areas due to how similar they look. And by the end, I wanted to be done, which is never a good look for a game. Overall though, I would give Borderlands a solid 65 out of 100 score. It is an alright game, but when compared to the others that came after it, I can't help but notice how much it falls behind. But considering the concept of a Borderlands game was introduced here, and how the game can still be a ton of fun in short bursts, I would still recommend it as a starting point to players who want to pick up the franchise. But what do you think of Borderlands? Do you think it's aged poorly, or have I been too harsh? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. But I've been Ranger, and this is why Borderlands isn't as good as we all remember.